You drop your kid off at the dorm. You wave goodbye. You drive away. And then the absolute panic hits. You are not just worried about whether they will eat right or get along with their roommate. You are thinking about the bill. The first tuition payment is due next week. If you're staring down a college price tag that looks like a second mortgage, you're standing in the exact same spot as millions of other parents. Let us look at the raw numbers. Since 1980, the cost of college tuition has quadrupled. A school like Harvard demands over $34,000 a year. Even standard universities cost upward of $30,000 annually. You want the best for your kids. You know the census data shows a clear link between a college degree and higher lifetime earnings. But knowing that fact does not magically produce $100,000 in cash. A lot of parents try to solve this by stuffing extra cash into a standard savings account at their local bank. That is exactly what you should not do. In a few minutes, I'll explain why one specific type of account could save you thousands in taxes, and why setting it up the wrong way could literally give your 18-year-old legal permission to blow their entire college fund on a motorcycle trip through Europe. But first, we need to talk about why the old ways of saving fail us. Many parents open a basic savings account in their own name. Financial advisors call this a traditional college account. The money belongs to you. If your car breaks down, you can use the cash. If your child decides to skip college and work on a shrimp boat in Louisiana, you keep the money. That sounds entirely safe. The problem is taxes. Every dollar of income and capital gains from that account belongs to you. You pay taxes on it every single year. You lose the power of compounding tax-free interest. It's the least efficient way to grow money over a long period. Hold on. Let's stop right there. Take a breath. If you're listening to this and your kid is already a freshman in high school and your college savings account is empty, do not turn this video off. You are not a bad parent. Life happens. Daily bills get in the way. The college fund often gets pushed to the bottom of the deposit list each month. We're going to fix that today. To tackle this mountain, we need a clear system. We have to break down the college funding process into specific steps. We must understand early savings math, the different types of tax-sheltered accounts, how the financial aid system actually works, and what to do when you have to borrow against your own assets. First, let us look at the math of early savings. The investment firm T. Rowe Price ran the numbers on what it takes to reach $100,000 by the time your child turns 18. They assumed a modest 10% return. If you start saving the month your baby is born, you need to put away $161 a month. That's just under $2,000 a year. It's a very manageable number. But look what happens when you wait. If you start when your child is 8 years old, that number jumps to $447 a month. Wait until they turn 13, and you're looking at $1,140 every single month. It's much easier to pay a small amount over 18 years than a massive chunk over 5 years. So where exactly do you put that money? You have options. They all carry strict rules. Let's look at EE bonds first. You buy these bonds, and the interest accrues from the day you buy them until the day you cash them out. If you use that money to pay for college tuition, room, board, or books, the interest is completely tax-free. But there's a catch. You must be over 24 years old to buy them. The bonds must sit in the parents' names, not the child's name. You also have to hold them for at least 5 years before you can use them for college. You can't buy them when your kid is a high school junior and expect a fast tax break. The government also enforces income limits here. If your joint household income goes over $109,650, you lose the tax exemption. The accrued interest gets taxed. Now, let's talk about that motorcycle trip to Europe. Parents often try to lower their tax bills by setting up a Uniform Gifts to Minors Act, a UGMA account. You put money in the child's name. You act as the custodian. The first $750 of investment income the child earns is tax-free. The next $750 is taxed at the lowest possible bracket. It sounds completely logical. Here's the massive flaw. The money legally belongs to the child. The minute they become an adult, you lose control. If they decide they don't want to study economics, they can take that money, buy a Harley-Davidson, and ride away. You can't stop them. Financial advisors suggest keeping your UGMA investments small just to get the income tax advantage and putting the heavy savings somewhere else. What about education IRAs? The rules allow contributions up to $2,000 a year. The income and capital growth defer until you withdraw the funds for college. If your oldest child decides to skip college, you can change the beneficiary to a younger sister or brother. But if none of your kids go to college, the money becomes taxable to the last named beneficiary when they turn 30. They'll get hit with accumulated capital gains taxes. You can't just roll an unused education IRA over into a personal retirement account.
The most flexible option right now is the 529 plan. This account falls under Section 529 of the tax code. All earnings inside a 529 plan grow tax-free. An individual can contribute up to $50,000 a year. A married couple can contribute up to $100,000. You, the contributor, retain total control of the money. If your kid drops out of school, they cannot touch the cash. You can pass the money down to a niece or nephew. If you decide to take the money back for yourself, you will pay taxes on the earnings and face a 10% penalty. The government established that penalty to stop people from using 529s as personal, tax-free investment havens. Some state governments offer a specific type of 529 called a prepaid tuition plan. You buy tuition credits today at current prices. It locks in the cost. Even if tuition doubles over the next 10 years, your credits cover the exact same classes. But these specific plans only cover tuition. They do not pay for dorms, meal plans, or textbooks. You still need cash for those expenses. You also need to purchase more credits for a state university than you would for an area community college. We are about to cover the massive world of financial aid, but I want to plant a specific idea in your mind. Later in this video, I will tell you exactly why letting your child take their car to campus is a terrible financial decision that most parents regret by October of freshman year. Let us walk through a real-world scenario of applying for financial aid. Many college staff members will tell you to just pick the school you love and let them worry about the money. Do not listen to that advice. Imagine you find a school that costs $32,000 a year for tuition, room, and board. The admissions office offers your child a financial aid package worth $16,000 a year. You feel immense relief, but do the actual math. You are still paying $16,000 out of pocket every year. That does not include books, transportation, or a computer. Over 4 years, you're spending well over $64,000 for just one child. You have to figure out your maximum budget before your child ever applies. If a school breaks your budget even with financial aid, you need to look at state schools or community colleges, which average closer to $3,000 a year. To get any aid at all, you have to file the paperwork. During your child's senior year of high school, you fill out the College Scholarship Service profile, usually called the CSS profile. The College Board uses this form to figure out non-federal student aid. They take your financial information and forward it directly to the colleges. Then comes the free application for federal student aid. You probably know it as the FAFSA. This form is mandatory if you want federal grants, loans, or work-study jobs. The rules are strict. Your child must be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. They have to be registered with Selective Service if required by law. They have to attend a participating college, work toward a degree, and maintain satisfactory academic progress. The FAFSA determines if you qualify for federal Pell Grants or Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grants. Grants equal free money. You never repay them. The form also determines if you qualify for federal Perkins loans, Stafford loans, or federal work study. Work study means your child gets a job on campus to earn their own money. Loans must be repaid with interest. Beware of independent financial aid advisors who charge you fees just to sell you a student loan. Ask exactly how they get paid before you hand over any tax documents. Many are just looking for a commission. While you are paying these tuition bills, you need to claw back money from the IRS. You have 2 main tax credits available. Remember, a credit is a direct subtraction from the taxes you owe. It works much better than a standard deduction.
The HOPE credit covers the first 2 years of college. Your child has to attend classes at least half-time. You get a credit for 100% of the first $1,000 of qualified expenses. You also get 50% of the next $2,000. That equals a maximum credit of $3,000. For the junior and senior years, or for graduate courses, you switch to the lifetime learning credit. It is meant specifically for tuition and fees. You cannot use it for room, board, or commuting. The credit equals 20% of your expenses up to $10,000. That gives you a maximum credit of $5,000 a year. But the IRS takes these credits away if you earn too much. The benefits phase out entirely if your adjusted gross income goes over $80,000 for a single filer or $100,000 for married couples. If you exhausted your savings, maxed out federal aid, and still cannot cover the tuition bill, you have to look at the assets you already own. For most families, that asset is a house. You can tap into your home equity through a second mortgage, a home equity line of credit, or a fixed equity loan. A second mortgage gives you a lump sum of cash. You probably won't need all of it for the freshman year. You have to park the extra cash in a money market fund until the sophomore bill comes due. The repayment schedule is usually long. That keeps your monthly payments low, but you'll be paying off your house for a much longer time. A home equity line of credit works differently. The bank approves you for a specific limit, say $25,000. If you only need $18,000 for tuition, you only write a check for $18,000. You pay a variable interest rate on what you actually borrow. A fixed equity loan is for a specific amount, usually with a 5 to 7 year term. It carries a fixed interest rate. A fixed rate tells you exactly what your monthly payment will be until the loan is gone. A variable rate changes based on the prime lending rate. The massive benefit here is that the interest on these home equity loans is often tax deductible. Let us get back to the car. Your child wants to take a car to school. They are completely used to having a car at their disposal. You might want them to have it in case of emergencies, so you do not have to drive 3 hours to pick them up. Think hard before you say yes. Many colleges ban freshmen from having cars entirely. The schools that allow them charge heavy parking fees. Daily gas expenses add up fast. But here's the real hidden cost. When your child leaves their car at home while they're away at school, your auto insurance company gives you a massive discount. Sending the car to campus erases that discount and increases your insurance premiums immediately. Keep the car in your driveway. There's an even bigger danger on campus than a car: the credit card companies. They mail pre-approved cards directly to your child's dorm room. The average college senior graduates with over $7,500 in credit card debt. That debt carries prohibitive interest rates, and none of that interest is tax deductible. The marketing practices of these companies border on predatory. If you want your child to have a card for emergencies, go to your local bank yourself. Set up a card with an incredibly low limit so they can't borrow their way into a deep hole. Discuss the exact rules for using it. Better yet, stick to a debit card linked to the cash they earned working a summer job. Speaking of summer jobs, your kid needs one. Earning money and spending it wisely over the course of a school year is a required financial survival skill. If they earn $2,500 over the summer, that gives them $275 a month for a 9-month school year. That has to cover pizza, movies, and holiday gifts. If they overspend and run out of money in November, they have to get a campus job in December. We covered a massive amount of ground today. We ran the exact savings math. We looked at 529 plans, EE bonds, and the exact reasons to avoid giving 18-year-olds control of a UGMA account. We walked through the rules for the FAFSA and the CSS profile. We calculated out-of-pocket costs after financial aid, broke down the HOPE and lifetime learning tax credits, and laid out the mechanics of home equity loans. And we locked away the car keys and the credit cards. College is an incredibly expensive venture, but you have actual tools to make it work. If you found this breakdown helpful, subscribe to the channel. We post daily videos explaining exactly how to manage your money in plain English. Now I want to hear from you. Are you planning to use a 529 plan, or are you looking entirely at state schools to keep costs low? Drop your strategy in the comments below. See you in the next video on FinTech Buzz.